Yeah, I think I'm quite all right to start. And if anyone is going to join us, it's going to be fine today because it's an open sort of discussion, something we try and do once in 6 months. So that's why we don't have a guest speaker. And I've got some questions here. So it'll be good to have a really good discussion. So for those of you who don't know, I am Sandhya Iyer from the HR department. I'm an HR consultant. Based out of Hadlow, and this is a roundtable that we've been engaging in for the last 3 years now, and we also have local employment lawyers and HR consultants who join this discussion, and it's then recorded and shared with our members and employers so they can kind of, have an insight into how we have to put our heads together as well to discuss and understand how matters are best dealt with in an employment setting. Speaking of which, of course, today we've got Paul, Natasha, and Genevieve. I have a question which came through a couple of days ago, and I just thought I'd put it out there. It's quite an interesting one, and it'll be nice to have your insights. So this was a question about a contract clause, pensions, which I know is not a favorite area for a lot of us. But basically, the contract has a clause which talks about non-contractual bonuses. And the question was coming from an accountant to say, what happens with pension contributions when a bonus is non-contractual? And because the contract is also silent as regards the non-contractual bonus clause, as to what happens with pensions. So that was the question. Yeah, Genevieve, go ahead.
Okay, well, I think what happens here is that it will just be paid as a bonus, and therefore you will not have to attach a pension contribution.
Okay.
Because normally pension contributions are contractually set at a certain percentage of your salary.
Yeah.
Depending on where you get, let's say 5% you put in yourself, the employee puts in themselves, and then the employer matches it at 5%. I'm just giving an example because it can be a different percentage. So with a bonus, there's no percentage attached. If there's nothing written in the contract, I think it is just a bit of extra cash that you get at discretionary.
Yeah. Any other takes on that?
No, that would be my take on it as well. I mean, obviously, in an ideal world, the pension clause in the contract would say it's based on base salary only, nothing else is pensionable. But I think, as Genevieve says, like the assumption I think has to be that it's an additional payment, and therefore it doesn't normally fall to have pension contributions made. Once the employee has got it, they can always choose to put something into the pension, but I don't think that necessarily, but I'm certain it wouldn't bind the employer to also match any contributions they want to make from it. But obviously, in an ideal world, the contract would be very much clearer.
Natasha, what's your take?
I was just going to add to what Paul just said, that in an ideal world about the contract saying that, it quite often doesn't, and that's why it causes a bit of confusion, I think. But if it was, I would always make sure that was drafted in that way.
Yeah, I think in this situation, what we learned was that the contract was very clear that anything to do with, I mean, if it's salary, it's salary. Yes, there'll be pension, there'll be deductions towards pensions. So the deduction of wages clause was very much included in the same clause as a salary clause. There was nothing mentioned in relation to non-contractual payments made by the employer. However, the catch was to have a look at the pension providers agreement itself, and to just ensure that that pension agreement did not have a caveat to say any bonus payments, be it contractual, non-contractual, also would entail a pension deduction to the pension pot. And that was an additional level of check that we realized that had to be done and was advisable to do. So as far as the contract was concerned, it was silent on whether non-contractual bonuses would attract pension contributions. It was mainly only as far as anything that was termed as salary and contractual. But the catch there was in relation to the pension agreement, which just had a blanket statement in relation to any contributions or any payments made by the employer, and that included bonus. It didn't make a distinction between whether it was contractual or non-contractual. So that was a catch, which came to light, and I just thought it was a very interesting one, and I would just share it because we were all a bit flummoxed about that. So I suppose every day is a school day. How has everybody felt about, I mean, what sort of feelers are you getting from your clients about the changes on flexible working? I know flexible working has very much been around, especially it's been in the spotlight since COVID, especially. But given the fact that, you know, the frequency of when somebody can submit it now is all, you know, increased, the deadlines to respond to it has reduced. So how is everybody feeling about, what are the feelings, you know, you're getting from your clients?
But
Yeah.
what I would say, is that about this is that I was always like, I had a job once in the past where long before it, and you know, it was long before it was fashionable, long before the law changed about flexible working, and my particular managing director, line manager, let us work wherever we wanted at any time. But that was his personality. That was what he wanted to give people freedom. And at the time, I actually loved it. But I mean, I went to the office, you know, very often, most of the time. And it was a job where there was travel. And I know people who've also been in very flexible, you know, to some extent, independent roles where they can work from home some of the time and not. Now I'm seeing a trend going to some people now are using the flexibility factor possibly more than is required and more than is good for the job. And I'm not judging that, but it's flexible working is good for what it's for, which is to give you flexibility, but perhaps not as a total lifestyle choice. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I agree.
Well, you don't have to agree because people are free to choose what they want, but it can sort of mean that you just don't go out and meet people, which might be a very important part of your job.
Yeah. Natasha, what sort of
Yeah,
feelers have you got from your clients? Have they said anything?
I think generally my clients have been sort of fairly okay with it. I don't think they're too concerned because I think because it has been, you know, the process and everything, you know, it's all kind of been in place for quite a while. And, you know, the business reasons for rejecting are all the same. You know, there's no sort of major changes like that in terms of what, you know, the nature of the request can be. But I think just from a practicality point of view, I think there's just that sort of just that more admin side of having to process more requests potentially. I mean, a lot of my clients are saying, well, we're pretty flexible anyway, so we're not really expecting a massive change. But I guess it will come down to whether actually, you know, they'll start to see maybe in the next couple of years whether it does make a big difference or not. But yeah, I think it's more just the paperwork side of actually making sure that they don't miss deadlines and that they process everything on time. But the actual basis of it, I don't think they're massively concerned about so far. Good change.
I have to say, I'll share sort of feedback we've had from our clients, but the bit about you touched upon admin, I think that's a bit of a bugbear for a lot of employers. Paul?
Yeah, I think I'd echo really what Natasha said. I think for my clients, it's not a major deal. I think perhaps a lot of workplaces, you know, as we've come out the back of lockdown, there's a lot of hybrid working going on. There's a lot more flexibility than there was before. And I think a lot of employers who can offer the flexibility are used to offering it, and those that can't just can't, and nothing changes for them. But it is, you know, as Natasha said, it's just that extra burden of, you know, well, we might get twice as many now that we've got to handle and wheel out the template letters for. But I think most employers' mindsets have changed for the better in terms of can we or can't we offer that flexibility, and I think that feeds through to some positive changes in the culture of most organizations. At the risk of perhaps becoming too positive a culture for some employees will just always want more, and they'll sort of see a positive culture as being something that they can then sort of get their claws into more of. But I think the actual legislative changes that are around the corner, I'm not hearing any sort of major issues really from my clients in particular.
Yeah, welcome, Rose.
Hi.
Hi.
Sorry, I'm a bit late.
That's all right. We're just talking about flexible working and what sort of feelers you're getting from your clients in terms of the change in laws. So it'll just be good to have, I know you've just joined, but I'll come back to you in a minute. But in terms of our clientele, obviously we deal with only small and medium enterprises, and we are finding that it's a bit of a mixed bag. Then across the board, I don't think anybody is very happy about the fact that the changes in the law that is going to result in more admin for a smaller business, which is typically very lean, and it's going to land in the lap of the business owner typically to address these more frequent flexible working requests. But on the other hand, we are also discovering, or other businesses are discovering, that it has become an opportunity now for them to take succession planning more seriously. Because where, for example, you have one individual who comes in and says, who's been quite a long-standing good employee, and comes in and says, actually, I can't work for X number of days in the week because of whatever reasons, that's almost forcing clients and employers to think about either upskilling internally for somebody to fit into that role, or to just look at a succession plan, which earlier was there, but it was always on the back burner. So in some ways, flexible working request or the change in laws, given the fact that it may well come up more often, has opened up that conversation, and that is definitely a positive, especially for a small business. So that's what we are finding. Roz, what has been your experience? So
I haven't really had any feedback one way or another, and I have a feeling that's because quite a lot of the companies that I work with haven't got any kind of recent experience of managing things like flexible working requests anyway. So I think they're the sort of businesses where, when it comes to pass that somebody puts in a request, then they'll just have this new process to navigate. It's not that different, but it is slightly different, obviously. And they won't really have any recent experience to kind of compare it with. So I haven't really had any kind of like overly kind of concerning or negative feedback from anybody. I've tried to make sure that I've communicated to everyone, and I've done various different policies and updates and all the rest of it as a result, but nobody's come back to me and said, oh God, this is awful, what the hell are we going to do?
Well, you're fortunate, because I think I had to prepare clients from almost 4 or 5 months before, and it didn't go down very well even then. I think what shocked them the most was the fact that it can now be every 6 months, the request can be put forward, or well, twice, in 12 months.
Twice in a year,
yeah, twice in 12 months.
And from day one.
And the deadline, and from day one. Yes, that's definitely peeved some employers off. I've just had one employer coming, or rather a colleague coming and telling me they've spent a whole month training somebody, and 1 month into the job, they've decided to leave the business. And we were comparing it with is that a better problem to have than somebody coming and requesting flexible working in the very first week of work, for example. But the other bugbear for employers is also, given the fact that you only have 2 months now to respond to flexible working, including any appeal. And for a small business that's really busy, that is, a big ask, trying to fit all of that in. And yet consider the option of, or have the option of, being faced with that same issue 3 or 4 months down the line. So that's what I think people are, and it'll be interesting to see some case studies on how one really tackles, say, for example, you receive a request now, you address it in 2 months' time. What measures can you put in place, or how can you try and mitigate the risk of something coming up very soon after that, in 2 or 3 months' time? What sort of boundaries? And I suppose the law has to evolve and give us some answers there. Right now, it's a bit unclear as to what would one do if you received a request from the same person 2 months down the line. Circumstances change, that's different. But if it hasn't, and they just want to try and test the waters, what do you do?
Yeah. I mean, we have still got the you can rely on those 8 reasons to turn down the request, can't you? Still.
Yeah.
So I think that it's just, I think for businesses, it's just going to be making sure that they nail the process, and that they are able to if they do want to say no, that they've got to genuinely be able to pin it on one of those or more than one of those reasons. It's just whether people, because of any kind of media coverage that that anybody's seen, whether it's been this interpretation that they've got the right to work flexibly rather than the right to ask to work flexibly, which are two very different things.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, you know, how people's expectations have been managed in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Any other points or questions from anyone in the room? I mean, you know, have you had anything interesting of late that you'd like to discuss over here?
I had one which might be a fun one and probably quite short. I've got a client who's got an employee who's got quite long service, so late 20s years of service, and he's in his 50s. And I think that they're trying to have a conversation about his future plans, and he's kind of said that he's not really, they're doing a very small relocation, sort of, you know, 5 miles away or whatever. And he sort of said, I don't want to move. Obviously it's a life-changing move, 5 miles. But he doesn't want to move. And so they're having a conversation, say, well, it's not going to trigger redundancy because it's a very small journey time that's you know, been affected. So they're saying, if you were redundant, this is what you get, and let's try and come to an arrangement where we meet somewhere in the middle, maybe. But this guy has come back and said, I've got the right to redundancy because the move is more than 5.8 miles. And, you know, we're just like, where does he get 5.8 miles from? It's just such a random number. Has anybody? And obviously, I had quite a lot of experience with redundancy and relocations and stuff, and we've moved people way further than that and not given them redundancy. So I just wondered if anybody'd heard anything similar in the past, because it's just such a weird number to choose.
I've never heard of 5.8 miles. You come across such weird and wonderful urban myths in this job, don't you? But I don't know that one. It seems like a very short distance, even if you sort of think back to, you know, dark days of, you know, industrial past and green books in local authorities. You can't imagine it was ever as short as 5.8 miles. But I've never seen that one. That's for sure.
Yeah. The employers asked him to go away and come back and show him where he's got this information.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to find it.
Very weird question, isn't it?
Yeah. Tumbleweed.
Tumbleweed, I like the term. Hi, Gemma.
Hi, sorry, I'm a bit late. I got caught on a call.
That's all right. I was just saying that it's more an open forum today. So if you've got any interesting points or questions that you would like to chuck to the group, and we can all have an open discussion. But we were earlier talking about flexible working, and yeah, Rose has just had a question about redundancy, whether that would be triggered just because the business is moving 5 miles and somebody's come up with a question saying it's 5.8 miles, and does that trigger redundancy? So
I've never heard that before either.
Very odd. Very odd. He's talking to someone down the pub, clearly.
Yeah, as I say, I like your response, or the employer's response of show us where you've got that information and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Any other interesting cases anyone's dealing with?
I don't know whether it's particularly interesting for anyone, but I'm just curious as to what people might think. You know, obviously it's a completely separate subject, so disciplinary subject now. But you know, you're going through a disciplinary process, and my client is really dissatisfied with a member of staff and what is sort of conduct stroke performance. It's a bit of a mixture of both areas. And ordinarily, most clients, you know, we go through the process of warnings and then potentially dismissal if it's serious enough, if it's been on the record for the relevant time. They're really keen to go down the demotion route and reduce pay. And it's just not something that many of my clients tend to impose. You know, usually it's we're sort of managing somebody out of the business, going through that sort of staged process. And I just thought, Just wondered whether many of you have really, whether you deal with that quite regularly or not at all. Because I'm sort of obviously there's concerns about sort of breach of contract and things if they don't have sufficient grounds really for reducing somebody's pay. This particular employee was promoted into like a team leader role, so they got like an enhanced pay rate for doing that job, and they essentially want to bring them back down to the more sort of standard level of what they were doing before, because they haven't performed as a team leader. So I feel like it's quite safe to go ahead, but I just wonder whether anyone else really comes across this very often, essentially, of going down the demotion, reduced pay rate, and potentially that employee will then say, I'm going to leave because I don't want, I need to be paid a certain rate to stay here, sort of thing.
I have a question, Natasha. Was the matter of the disciplinary, was it in relation to performance or was it something else? It's
a mixture of performance, of really not sort of stepping up, if you like, to the team leader job description, of those additional responsibilities that would be expected of that role, but also misconduct in terms of sort of attitude towards their manager, swearing, that sort of a bit of a mixture of offences, if you like. So generally, it's not really worked very well. They promoted this girl into the role, and since they did, it sort of all seems to have gone horribly wrong, and it's had the opposite effect of what they were trying to, get from her, really.
Can I just make a comment?
Yeah.
I was going to say, you just mentioned swearing. Some people think that's bad. Some people think nowadays, it's quite acceptable. It's nothing. I'm a bit on the fence about that because, it's different for different people. But surely people knew his personality, what he was like a bit before they promoted him. I mean, he probably hasn't changed a lot since he was promoted.
According to my client, there has been quite a significant change in attitude since the promotion. But yeah, you're right. That was I was, concerned about that why would you promote somebody
if they've been swearing, if they generally use swearing in their language, and the employer doesn't really like that and thinks that's not acceptable for our organisation, then why would you promote that person? To some extent, the employer has to take responsibility for the decisions they make.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as far as I'm aware, there weren't any specific incidents like that prior to being promoted. This has all sort of come about. It's all, I mean, I don't know. It's sort of almost as though they've put this person in this sort of greater position, and it's like I say, and it's had the opposite effect of somebody thinking, oh, great, I've been promoted. They obviously think a lot of me. I'm getting a higher pay rate. They're sort of really throwing their weight around now and sort of saying, well, I don't need to do that anymore. And I'm not, and essentially things like, I'm not going to do that job. I'm not going to tell my team to do that job because I don't really like doing it myself. And they're saying, well, you're meant to be the team leader. You're meant to be setting the example. So, at one point they were talking about dismissal, and then they started talking about, like I say, bringing that person back down onto the previous pay rate and demoting them back into their existing role. But it's just not something that many of my clients do. They normally go through, give a warning, and if they don't improve, then they're terminated, further down the line.
I
thought that
yeah, go ahead, Brad.
Sorry, I was just going to say, my feeling about, so obviously if it's an alternative to dismissal, then my understanding is that you can offer it as an alternative so that the person doesn't lose their employment if it could be tolerated by the business, which it sounds like it could be, but it can't be something that's forced on the employee. So it's kind of like the normal outcome here would be dismissal, but we wanted to offer you the chance to stay with us, but you would have to take this role on this basis and salary, blah, 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 terms and conditions. And then they decide. That would be, because of all the things that you've talked about breaching the contract, you can't force somebody to take a demotion. Obviously the alternative is dismissal, but that's it, isn't it? Is it got to be their choice?
Can I just add to the point that Rose has just made? I would be careful because, and this is just leaning back on my experience of working with local authority. there you have a tendency of unions kind of drilling things into you as to what's expected, right? So which I think is a good thing. But what is expected usually when you're talking about demotion and reduction in pay as a penalty for a disciplinary, you are in a better position to impose that penalty if that is outlined as one of the possible outcomes of the disciplinary in your disciplinary policy.
Yeah, it does.
If your disciplinary policy is silent about demotions and a loss of pay or a reduction in pay, then you're on slightly lose ground when imposing that. But equally, going back to the earlier point that was made about this individual's personality, one thing I would consider is whether imposing that sort of an outcome or a penalty is going to solve the problem. Because ultimately a penalty is intended to bring about some sort of corrective action and make the situation better. Now, if demoting this person and allowing them to engage with staff or managers in that manner is not going to make that problem go away or even correct that issue, then really is it worth it? Or should you just be sticking with a first written warning, for example, and trying to manage that person out of the business eventually? Because these sort of behaviors don't usually go away very easily.
No, I
Has
agree.
anyone actually had a conversation with the individual to find out, has there been an investigation because if you've had that shift in personality, is there something else going on that is impacting their behavior? Is there something outside of work influence or something that's created that shift in behavior?
I think there could well be. They had a meeting last week and I got the notes of the meeting, and there's reference to her seeing her doctor, and but there are no details about anything, just that she's seen her doctor, she's seeking help, she has anger issues, and all of these sorts of things. So there's definitely bits of information that have come through from having that meeting with her, which they weren't aware of before. So it's definitely something they've got.
It's difficult. I've got a similar one actually, where is it a capability or is it a misconduct? And it's almost like you have got that messy situation where you've got someone who's swearing that, if someone considers that's not acceptable in the workplace, but you've obviously got someone that has stepped up into a role and perhaps isn't coping with it or has external factors that are affecting their ability to cope in that role. So that's then becomes more of a capability issue, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And if she's mentioned doctors and things, then is it worth an occupational health just to kind of tick that box as well?
And see what's going on.
Paul, you had something.
Yeah, because I think actually this feeds a little, and I was going to say really the same as what Ros said, which is I think even where you've got a policy or a contractual right to demote, I would always recommend if you're going to demote, I would say the standard of proof should be the same as if you're going to dismiss. So if you've got any doubts about capability, health assessments, those kind of things, I think they should all feed in, because once you've issued, if you're going to enforce a demotion, that could well result in a resignation and a constructive dismissal claim. So, realistically, if you're going to defend a constructive dismissal claim, you're going to need to demonstrate you had a fair process and that it was a reasonable decision to issue the demotion. Therefore, in my view, the standard of proof should be exactly the same as if you were going to dismiss. So whilst you might have a right to impose, test is still the same of making sure you've got all the right building blocks in place. And if you've got all of those, I'd be with Ros. I would generally go with, our decision is that this is worthy of dismissal, but here's a lifeline. Would you like to accept the motion instead? I'd generally veer towards that. Because apart from anything else, I think it concentrates the mind of the decision maker better as well, that actually they're not making a decision here that someone's just going to lose a bit of money on a monthly basis. They need to be thinking that the decision they make is going to deprive someone of a livelihood the same way as a dismissal decision would be. And I think that helps concentrate the decision makers' minds in a much clearer way, and therefore make sure that they have checked all these things. What are the behavioral underpinnings? What opportunities have we given driven the individual to improve? Is there a health issue that we need to get assessed? All those kind of things, I think they're still at play, whether it's a demotion or a dismissal. And yeah, for me, I'd be with Ros, and actually it's our decision is this is really bad, and you shouldn't be here anymore, but aren't we lovely? Why don't you take this as a backup, because we want to give you a chance. I realise my Wi-Fi
Yeah,
is a
that's
bit
great.
wobbly, but as I think my vision might have disappeared, but hopefully did everyone hear what I was saying? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you, Paul. It's fine.
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
Has that
Mm.
been helpful, Natasha?
Oh, sorry, I thought I was unmuted.
No, thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. That was really helpful. Really good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Anything else anyone's dealing with?
I've got one. I know we've talked about it in this forum before. WhatsApp groups outside of work. So.
Oh, Gemma, I have to go. I'm so sorry. I want to get involved in that one.
Yeah,
we'll WhatsApp you separately.
Oh, God.
if I'd known, I would have run in the opposite direction. Actually, I've got two issues that I'd be interested in opinion for. So WhatsApp group outside of work. Someone has said something about one of their colleagues on the WhatsApp group, and someone in the group has now shared that with the individual who's now taken it upon themselves to raise a bullying and harassment grievance.
Mm.
However, this morning I've then had an email to say, actually, one of the people now wants, I'm still getting to grips with kind of the details of it, wants to withdraw from the WhatsApp group and wants to withdraw their involvement in the whole case. And I'm kind of like, you got yourself into this, so we need to see it through as an employer. What do people think?
Can I make a comment? It's just that what has been, you don't need to tell any details, but what's been said and not said, is it unkind? Are they being nasty? Can you really call it bullying, or is the person just feel self-conscious because they've been talked about behind their back?
So I think there has been a derogatory comment,
Yeah.
but my thinking at the moment is, and still very early stages, is this a one-off, just one comment on the WhatsApp group, or is there actually is there an undercurrent of bullying within the workplace anyway? I think there is generally some cultural issues, but it's just the WhatsApp. Why do people have WhatsApp?
Why do they make stupid comments on WhatsApp?
Yeah, exactly.
And then choose to share it? I understand it's private WhatsApp, it's outside of work time, but why, if you're on that group, would you go and share it with the individual? It's just, ugh.
But what
I think it just feeds.
Sorry.
Okay.
Paul?
I was going to say, the person that wants to withdraw, are they one of the protagonists, or are they just a lurker?
No, I think they're one of the protagonists.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, they can't change history, can they? I suppose.
No.
So they need to be investigated then.
That's what I think.
But may I agree. Ask, this WhatsApp group, what was it set up for? Is it for sharing ideas or something? I mean, why?
No, it's completely unrelated to work. It's just social. Okay. It's just with a few people that all get on within one company.
It just demonstrates the sort of evolving nature of the workplace, doesn't it? These are the kind of things that were happening in pubs 20 years ago, and we had to sort of wheel out policies to remind people that if they're having gatherings with colleagues after work on a Friday, that it should be treated as though it's the extension of the workplace, and people need to be careful. And I think just WhatsApp groups are the next thing. You've got all sorts of issues with actually, if it's if it's a work group so consisting solely of employees, is there a right to search that for data subject access requests? Yes, probably in most cases that's the situation. But it just highlights the need then for the employer's policies to evolve to say this. And I think some workplaces now are certainly expressing that WhatsApp groups are banned, and that people should use Teams if that's the if they've got a Microsoft based workplace, so that everything can be monitored more easily, so that subject access requests can be responded to more easily, but also to help colleagues remember that this is a work this is work related, and therefore, and it's, and it was exactly the same when emails first came in. People were treating emails as though they were, a chat with someone at the water cooler, and it was probably the same when faxes first came in as well. Anything that's sort of new and it's immediate, it's different. People just sort of revert to chatty conversational approach as though it's it's in the pub of an evening. And I think where it's colleagues, then I think it is where it has to be treated as a workplace situation. And I think if the allegation is serious enough, then you investigate it, even if someone wants to withdraw, even if the victim wants to withdraw, their complaint. I think, when things are serious, you investigate them. And I think perhaps this is an unfortunate way of doing it, but perhaps this is the sort of maybe the wake-up call that the employer needed to realize this sort of stuff.
Well, I think they've
needs
tried
dealing with.
they've tried to tackle it internally, but has never actually got to a resolution, and kind of feel like they're sort of banging their heads against a brick wall and it's not actually changing anything. So I think they're hoping that by actually taking it more formally and getting an external investigator in to look at it, that might then provide more clout, as it were,
Gemma,
to take it
just
forward.
one thing there. I mean, one thing for you to look at might be helpful, because I had a similar case a few months ago where that was, of course, a case of banter, similar to this, just that it wasn't on WhatsApp, but it was banter that was taking place outside of the workplace because individuals working within the organization were very much within the same community, as tends to be the case with smaller businesses, and they would be hanging out in a social context outside of work, but that banter would then trickle back into the workplace because they were also colleagues.
Yeah.
And it ended up being a case of actually sexual harassment, because there were many comments that were made, gender specific comments, that was leading to sexual harassment within the workplace. Now, I was in a similar situation as you, where, you kind of think, where is the line, or has a line been completely blurred? And I think where the line I took there was, if whatever is being said is having an implication on the way this person is able to deliver their job, the work environment, then yes, that's something that an employer has to look into and investigate. It doesn't matter in what context something was said or done. But if it's having a direct impact on the individual's ability to do the job and deliver to a customer on a day-to-day basis, then the employer has a duty to investigate it.
Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it.
I was going to say, I'm going to say something similar, but it's actually just to sort of back up what's just been said, is that because you pointed out that, it has to be related in a way, it's outside of work, and it's banter, but it's related to what's going on at work, and that's fair comment. If it's completely nothing to do with work, I would say you have to be a bit more careful, because the employer isn't actually responsible for everything their employees does outside of work. It's not our entire life outside of work relates straight on to what we do at work. And anybody's behavior outside of work isn't necessarily going to get someone into trouble at work. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I totally agree with
our
that.
private life and our personal life and the things that we do outside of work, there is a line there as well. So you do have to somewhat differentiate what has an impact on work. It does relate to work and the people and the way they carry on at work. What actually isn't necessarily favorable for us to know, but is actually nothing to do with work.
I think the extension of that is whether that's impacting on the individuals to deliver their role.
Yeah.
And the case that I was looking at, it was having an impact on them, because it was just constant, that conversation and banter that was happening outside of work, not related to work, but was trickling back into the workplace, almost like a continued conversation. And this individual was just not able to carry on delivering. It was just getting a bit too much and too heavy and not funny anymore.
Yeah, I understand that. In that case, Sandy, I think that makes a really good distinction, that impact on ability. With this, if it's just a one comment that the employee wouldn't have known about or heard about, had it not been for someone, if there's nothing else going on there, they wouldn't have known about it. There's no other incidents of bullying, then it kind of
I think for
potentially
bullying
sits
and
outside.
harassment, the first thing you want to look at and you would be looking at is patterns. Is there a recurring
Exactly.
pattern?
Mm.
That's the first test, isn't it? And if you're talking about a one-off comment that is derogatory and rude, maybe we pull them aside and have a conversation
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
ask them to behave like adults. But if there is a pattern where there's some background emerging, and that obviously you will only know if you investigate.
Yeah. But then if it is just that one-off, then it sits outside of that workplace situation, I think, doesn't it? Because it's then
can I
potentially
just-
not having an impact.
Sorry, can I just add about, does it not sort of have an impact depending on the relation, who the parties are as well? So, you know, if these people work together, so obviously could be somebody that works in an organisation and they have nothing to do with each other in their day-to-day job. But if they're, you know, if that's their line manager or if that's their peer, it could be that someone that reports into them, that would have an impact on how you deal with it as well, wouldn't it? Because that could affect their day-to-day job if they have to deal with that person.
Yeah.
Even if it is just a one-off comment or event, or, you know.
I think there's a lot of overlapping areas here, isn't there? Because actually, I think so. It's a sort of, Sandy, the point that you put in about even a non-work related thing can overflow. That's definitely true. I think here we're looking at a WhatsApp group with work colleagues in, and I think that makes it more workplace related in the first place. You know, Natasha, to your point, of course, the level of the person that's involved will you know could reinforce the work nature of the conversation, but then also I think we're bordering on a little bit as well of, you know, actually is if it's a one-off comment but it's really serious, but it's still not work related, that could still be work related in the same way that if someone puts an Instagram post up with a massively racist comment in it, for example, and that goes to the heart of the values of the organization, as it rightly should.
Yeah.
You know, it speaks to the values that person holds and whether that person is right within the organization. Of course, the outcome of any conversation will depend on lots of factors around, you know, actually, do they manifest those views at work? Has there ever been any issue, things like that? But I think there are some things that are work related because of their context. So obviously, a meeting room where everyone's sitting around a table or sitting on the same Zoom or Teams meeting, they're work related because it spills over into the workplace. They're work related because it's views by a manager, or they might just become work related for a completely non-work post on social media or non-work related comment in a WhatsApp group that is then shared with management to go to the heart of what this person, what a particular might be really like. They'll all have slightly different routes through, and they'll all have sort of slightly different ranges of outcomes. But I think whether there's any where, you know, I think that the bit where there's something completely non-work related, but it has an impact, you start thinking then reputation and concerns of colleagues, those kind of things, as sort of rumors start to grow. And so all these things get into the pot, don't they? I think you know, it's a really complicated area. But
I think there's
it's
also an
one that
element of
employers
needing
just
to
increasingly have to grapple with.
Yeah, there's also an element of needing to nip something in the bud as well because if this one isn't that serious, it doesn't mean that the next one won't be more serious. So actually it's kind of stopping that culture of the WhatsApp groups and the niggles and that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Agreed.
But it's interesting, this element of this person wasn't in the group and wouldn't have known about it had someone else not reported it. And it's like, why did that person feel the need to share it?
Yeah, agreed.
So, thank you.
All right. I had a tricky question on travel, traveling during the work, you know, a working day, and where you have an events company, for example, which requires, you know, they do gigs, they organize gigs for clients, and when I say they organize gigs, they're also into creating visual arts and things like that. So if you have staff who work out of a desk for the most part of the day, but later in the day or as an extension of working off, out of the desk, they also are required to sort of travel on work to these gigs to put these visual arts up and organize that. My understanding is that that element of travel is still considered to be work time because you're still at the beck and call of your employer. Am I right?
That would be my understanding as well,
I
Sandy.
would, I would
Yeah.
say so. Yeah, it's not their normal commute to and from work; it's travel for work.
Exactly. So
Yeah,
regardless of, but of course, then the question comes in as to what happens when somebody is traveling abroad. Like, you're away on 2 or 3 days, you're organizing and putting up, setting up this gig and coming back. But those, how does one build in international travel into travel time? Yes, you're still on work, but where it's a long haul flight, I mean, are you saying the entire 3-day period is a non-stop working day? I mean, how do you build something like that into drafting it in a contract, for example? And that's what I'm currently grappling with.
Does it come down to rest period? So, as long, yes, the
As
travel
well.
time would be included as work time if it's that long, but
Absolutely.
actually what's then the rest time? So yeah, I think you probably are looking at more, it is all work time.
Mind you, with international travel, yes, you are put up in a hotel, there is time for rest, but it's still all on work mode, really, because it's you're there because of work. And then
I think the
time
whole
back.
3 days doesn't become travel
No. It
time, doesn't
wouldn't.
become working time. No, I think it's but the journey time would, but then once they're out there, they're doing a working shift,
Working
and that
day.
shift ends. And the fact that they're not coming home, the fact that they're in a local hotel doesn't convert it
Doesn't
into
count. So really what we are
working
looking
time.
at is even if you're traveling abroad, so that's again my understanding that you really, if it's a flight you're taking or a train you're taking, it's that travel time alone until you reach your destination is just what is travel time. And anything outside of that, unless you're actually engaging with a client, except times when, so again, when you're engaging with a client overseas, that's again work time. Similar, yeah. So anything outside of that would not be travel time. Am I right?
Yeah,
That
I
would be
think
my
my
view, yeah.
only
There's got to be
my
a
only
break.
comment my only comment on that would be if people travel internationally and long haul, what is the expectation for keeping up with work that's going on back in the UK or emails and things? Because it can be quite common if people are traveling internationally that you might do a long day at an event, so 8 till 6 setting up an event, but actually then you go, there's then potentially social time in the evening, and then actually are people then catching up with emails and stuff when they get back to their hotel because you're then on the same time zone as the UK? When does that kind of
Yes.
time? It's a
Those are,
very long day.
I know, yeah. Yeah, and I've in the gamut of what I'm dealing with, I think that's easily sort of addressed, that can be addressed in terms of email and stopping and, when you respond and what the lead time has to be. It's really trying to kind of defining what constitutes travel time when you are traveling abroad, and equally when you're traveling within the UK. Within the UK is relatively easier. Obviously, I'm getting some pushback from the client, but the law lays it out, excuse me, quite clearly. It's more what happens when they are abroad and having to kind of just, word that out, word that properly. Somebody had a point. I don't know who it was. Genevieve, was it?
Yeah, I was going to
Thank
say, if they do a lot of travel generally in their job, I mean, you'd have to allow some, I agree, you have to have some flexibility there because it must be quite clear that yes, they're traveling, but let's face it, nowadays you can check your email while you're on a plane, and it might be expected in their role that they check their email. They don't necessarily have to be working the whole time.
Yeah.
But they might be expected to be, on call. And then the other aspect, I know people take call, they're standing, in the airport lounge and they put their suitcase through security and then they take their mobile phone because someone's trying to contact, let's speak just before we get on the phone. So there must be some kind of natural expectation that the person's sort of on work. They're at work. They're
Yeah.
not sort of on holiday, don't contact me. but something natural and, you know, reasonable, because they, you know, you travel, you get to a hotel, you can have to sleep. So I think you need to make the drafting somewhat, yes, you're at work, but what would you expect for someone who's traveling? They might not pick up the phone straight away. Do you know what I mean?
I agree. I'd keep it fluid as much as possible in a
Yeah.
policy as well, and you know, kind of, you know, for longer journeys, you know, you and your manager will discuss appropriate working time and arrangements to support your well-being, for example, something like that. You might throw in there. But you know, I think, I guess the other reality is sort of what is the risk we're trying to overcome here? You know, if it's about sort of maximum working hours in a week, well, obviously that, you know, it's 48 over a 17-week reference period. Is that an issue? If there's a lot of overseas travel, is it practically an issue? Are these you know, these people who can be trusted to be sent overseas to do an important thing? Where is, you know, sort of where is the practical risk coming from? Yeah, I'd be inclined not to overcomplicate the wording, and just try and rely on trust as much as possible, because as you say, as
It's not so
we've
much the
demonstrated,
trust. It's not so much the trust, or it's more to do with, you know, whether you're allowing enough and proper breaks, because then you're going to work time regs and that becomes a health and safety matter. It's not so much employment law alone.
yeah,
And you
no,
don't
that's
want
what I
to
mean in terms of
inadequate break.
that two-way
17
trust, though. That's
yeah.
what I mean is actually, yeah, again, where is the risk coming from? And I think, you know, actually, if it's a good working relationship, legal risks are always lower if it's a good working relationship, right? Because they don't arise. People have conversations. The reason we're all kept busy is because those conversations, those relationships don't work all the time. But I think I'd be inclined to try and keep the wording as light touch on this as possible, and for there to be conversations when someone's about to have a longer working trip, or there's a special event that everyone's going to be expected to go to. I'd almost be inclined to try and keep the policy as fluid as possible, because what might be right today might not be right in a year's time, might not be right tomorrow if a super special event crops up and it means that half the office is going to have to travel around halfway around the world for a major event. And so I think, you know, we all find this all the time, don't we? We can't draft for everything. And if you draft too much flexibility, then it sort of, what's the point? But I think this might be a scenario, Sandia, where if the client's comfortable and understands the advice that you're giving them in terms of protecting people's health and safety, which is absolutely at the heart of this, if they understand that, giving them the freedom to have those conversations when the issues arise, rather than trying to lock in and trying to anticipate every single eventuality in this sort of policy, is always going to tie yourself in knots.
Natasha, did you have something to say?
No, I think that all made sense. All I could think about was time zones, and just thinking that would really mess everything up, wouldn't it, in terms of working out
It is
hours.
messy. Yeah, and I think
nothing
the reason also the question came up is because this, as a business, they submit timesheets, and it's being clear about how staff have to log time, and it's, as you say, it is messy. So it's just sort of helping the client have some clarity on their staff and how they would go about things. But no, I think it's given me a few things to think about.
Do they give anything like time in lieu? They give toil?
Of course, yeah, absolutely. There is time in lieu, very much so. But again, you have the whole thing with toil of taking it in the same pay reference period. Having said that, I mean, pay is pretty good. So you're never going to be at risk of going under the minimum wage and all of that. That's not a problem at all. But yes, just to take the time off in lieu within the same pay reference period, in the same, you know, within the 4-week period, that could be tricky given their travel commitments. So whether time off in lieu clauses will have to allow for a longer period before which it can be taken, that's something that is being explored.
Certainly, I've got a client where we do that.
Yeah, and they're definitely doing that. Yeah. But no, thank you. I'm just conscious of time, and I wanted to just, Catherine, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
You might want to switch on your camera, Catherine. There she is.
Hello, everyone.
I just wanted to I just want to say a massive thanks to Catherine. I mean, she's been with the Chamber for as long as I've known the Chamber, really, and much before my time. And sadly, I think, yeah, tomorrow is Catherine's last working day with the Chamber. And yeah, you're going to be missed immensely.
Thank you. Don't make a fuss.
I just want I had to warn Catherine before this this meeting to say, I need you there at the end of the meeting, so you switch on your camera and don't keep hiding. But no, I just wanted to say huge thanks, and yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Catherine.
Thanks,
Thank
Catherine.
you, Catherine. You'll be missed.
Yeah, so have a good Easter anyway, everyone, and we'll be back in 2 months' time. I will try and get a speaker next time, but I just wanted to have one such session like this, which is an open forum, and I think it's been really useful,
It's useful.
exchanging
Yeah.
questions and
Yeah,
things
I
like this. So
I think I was just going to say, I think you should do an open forum like this, you know,
every now and then, yeah.
but do another one. They're good.
Yeah, it's a nice, yeah, we try and keep it to, so in a year, we have 6 round tables. So we're trying to work towards 3 sort of question answers and 3 with guests. And that provides a nice mix. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much and
All
have a
right,
lovely one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks all.
Bye.
See you soon.